Welcome back to another episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamone, and I'm an acceptance coach who helps people heal from grief, loss, and trauma to discover their self acceptance and step into their personal power. This podcast is your dedicated space for healing, growth, and transformation. Each episode shares insightful and inspirational stories, along with practical tools and actionable insights that can help guide you along your healing journey. Today's guest is Lisa. She's a native of South Orange, New Jersey, where she is the youngest of three children. Following her first marriage, she moved from the Scottish Plains, where she dedicated herself to raising her family. Currently, she resides in Delaware with her husband, Jerry. With over 40 years of experience as a registered respiratory therapist, Lisa has transitioned into the role of a certified grief educator. Lisa has a book, Navigating Grief and Divorce, that we're going to go over a little bit in this podcast. But Lisa did go through grief and a divorce process earlier on in her life. And today she's going to share that story with us and show how she went through the grief going through divorce and also how she learned to heal from that and step into the role that she's in today. So without further ado, Lisa, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Likewise. And I know it's been a couple months since you and I talked, and I'm excited to hear your story again because your book was remarkable when you told me about it. So I'm gonna let you share the details with that so I don't ruin it for everybody.
All right.
But I wanted to start the podcast with you sharing with us your grief journey through divorce.
Sure, sure. So, it was about 20 years, well, probably about 20 years ago now. And I didn't really realize how bad grief is when you're going through a divorce. When I became a grief educator and I learned a lot of information about grief, realizing the whole process that I'd gone through. I've raised my children. I now have grandchildren. But my ex-husband and I, end of the story, are still in a very friendly relationship. So pretty much the point of my book is to talk about, or my story is how I went through the grief process and ended up staying friends for the benefits of our kids and ourselves and my own sanity at the end of the day. So I felt people could maybe reach or learn from that. If it's not possible to stay friends with your ex, I totally get that, but there's a lot of information in there about the grief process. So basically, in the beginning, we were married for over 15 years, and my husband came home one day, and he was coming home from a trip that my daughters were on, a band trip, and he did not come right home. And when I got home, I was asking my children that were now home from the trip where their father was, and they told me he was unloading buses at the school. Well, I had just ridden by the school and he was not there. So I had a feeling where he was, and I did go drive by that person's house and he was there. So that was the beginning of the end of our marriage. He did come home that night and I asked him why, he went to see this person first. And that's basically it, just kind of spilled out from there. There was no hiding anything, there was no denying anything. He kind of just went through the whole process. Um, so, being the first stage of grief being anger, I'm sure you could understand that I went through a lot of anger. Part of my journey, that first summer, I spent drinking a lot of alcohol, um, not getting any help, not thinking I needed any help. Um, Try and still take care of my kids, but trying to deal with what was happening in my lifetime. We don't get married to and raise a family to um, stare at divorce in the face. So it was very, very difficult for me. My husband and I were both very involved in the town and in our kids' activities, so we knew a lot of people. My husband was on the local police force, so we had a lot of connections. So the embarrassment for me was horrible. I did not go out of my house for the first year. I tried to focus on my kids, just trying to get a hold of myself. I did go, see my doctor. My doctor gave me some medications for me to help calm me down a little bit, which seemed to help. It's not for everyone, but it did help for me. And I did realize at one point, you know what? I've got four kids here that I have to take care of. My first, one of my first thoughts when my husband left was I would never let him see my children again. How dare you leave your family, everything we've built? You don't deserve to see your children anymore. I learned going through the process that was probably not the right way to feel. It was how I was feeling at the time because I was hurting. But I did come to realize that as much as I didn't want to realize when I started to hit that acceptance stage that he was leaving me, he wasn't leaving his family. So I had to understand that part. He was never leaving his children, and he was a great father and still is a great father. So as time went by, we started to get through the divorce stage. I started going out with my friends again. I started healing myself. I started doing things I used to do before I was married. When you get married, you kind of take on the role with your partner, and you become a little bit of a different person because my priorities changed. My priorities went into raising my kids and not myself anymore. So it took me some time to become myself again, which I loved, and started my healing process. Funny story, my husband and I went to divorce court together. We drove in the same car and went and got divorced, and he drove me home. And when I got out of the car, all I could think to say was, I hope you get everything you're looking for. And my next comment was, I'll see you at Jennifer's game later this afternoon because my daughter had a softball game. So as crazy as that sounds, it was healing for me. And you know what? I couldn't change it anymore. And the realization had to come to me that I was part of the problem. Obviously there were issues in our marriage. Maybe I didn't face them, maybe I didn't realize them, but I was part of it. There was a reason, my husband went somewhere else, obviously. So when I started to come to that realization, it really helped me in the healing process. It helped me to find peace. And to this day, we all get together. A couple weeks ago, we were just at our grandson's birthday party. We're all able to be together, which is a great thing. It really, people think we're crazy. I know they do, but it's worked for us. And again, for me, it was really a nice part of the healing process that we're not hating each other in front of our children whenever we have to be at a function. We have marriages, we had to go through 4 marriages, we have grandkids. There's just so much to life out there that it wasn't going to be healthy for me to stay angry at him for the rest of my life. So I had to do some personal growth.
Lisa, I find your story amazing in so many ways because I worked in the mortgage industry for 8 years and I dealt with
Mhm.
people going through divorce every day of that job. And I cannot tell you how many times I dealt with people going through that divorce process that were just outright nasty to each other. And the
Mhm.
stuff that I won't share on the podcast, but stuff I heard
Right.
from people was just beyond any kind of anger you could get towards. And
Yes.
to hear that to hear that you got divorced and you drove together to the court to get divorced and then went to your child's soccer game after the fact
Hmm.
is such a rarity in that area of life.
Yes. It is. It is. And there are crazy stories in my book also about things that we've done together, and there's just whatever. It's just the way it was for us, honestly. And at one point, after all that anger and all that crying and all that, I hate him. And I had plenty of I hate you days, and I would text him and tell him, don't even talk to me today because I hate you so much. So I don't want people to think there wasn't an hate part. There definitely was. But for my sanity, what was I going to be angry at for the rest of my life? Because that's only going to hurt me. And I'm not that kind of person. I always like everyone to be happy and get along. And this was probably one of the hardest things I had to do was just to put what happened aside. And it did take about 2 years before I could function with him or be with him, in social events. But it did happen, and I'm happy to say it happened, and that's why I feel maybe my story reaching out to people can help others. Maybe just realize there is light at the end of the tunnel. It's how you look at it and how you take it. But my feeling was, why should I just be angry the rest of my life and saying bad things about their father in front of my children? I know people do it all the time. And I just think it just hurts the kids. It really does. Even when my husband and I were going through our hard times where we weren't speaking, I should say ex-husband, where we weren't speaking, There were times my children still needed to be disciplined. They
Mm,
were still doing bad things, and I would call him and I'm like, you need to come over and we need to sit and talk to them. And together we would continue to make the right decisions for our children. And then he would leave and I wouldn't speak to him again. But our children needed to be taken care of, and that was my priority, was to make sure that they knew he was still there and I was still there. And there was not going to be any of this playing game of, well, dad said or mom said. No, we talk to each other. So we know what we say to each other,
yeah.
So,
So tell me a little bit about, more about that grief journey that you went on because
mhm,
it sounded like everything was so, abnormal in a sense from what we're used to hearing around divorce. But
mhm.
as you went through that grieving process, how did you navigate that? Because I'm sure there was still anger at some point and some resentment over certain things, possibly. How did you navigate that in the early stages of grief?
So, like I said, the first summer was a rough one for me. I did, how did I navigate it? I grabbed a bottle or sat with my friend and we would drink wine all afternoon. And I would hope that those problems would go away. Of course, they were still there the next morning. So I did navigate in a bad way, and that's a way sometimes people do look towards um, other devices to help them through. Again, after that summer and realizing he was not coming back, I spent pretty much that he left in May. I pretty much spent from May till September, October, trying to get him back. I was like, this is it. I got to win him back. He's supposed to be with me. He's not supposed to be with this person. This isn't the way it's supposed to be. And that was that whole bargaining stage of making, oh, I won't do this again, or I won't do that again. You got to come back. He wasn't coming back. And I didn't realize that until probably September or October, maybe about 6 months after he left. He was not coming back. He was definitely not coming back. So now it was time to adjust and go through that whole anger part, the sadness, like I said, the bargaining, and it took about 2 years to get through that whole anger part. So I think it was about 2 years when we finally got divorced, and that when we did go to divorce court together, that was probably at the beginning of us. I would say maybe we were a month or two into us now having that little bit of a friendly relationship. But yeah, like I said, I didn't go out with my friends. I didn't want to be seen in public. I was cheerleading coach for my daughter. It was horrible going there and knowing people were looking at me. I couldn't imagine what they were saying about me. We lost I lost a lot of friends. I'm not sure what he did, but friends take sides. So we did lose some friends. Some friends we still have, and we still have them as couples. But there's a whole embarrassment part that goes with it, and I just couldn't put my face out there. I just couldn't imagine what people were going to be thinking about me. So support was huge. My sister was a huge guide for me in my support system. I do remember one of the first Christmases, and I was setting the table for Christmas dinner, knowing this was not the way Christmas dinner was supposed to be. Um, you know, he was supposed to be there. It was family. And it was Christmas Eve, and I was getting the table set, and my sister called me to see how I was doing, and I just started crying and crying and crying. And she said, stop what you're doing, grab your kids, and let's go to breakfast. So I went upstairs and I hugged all four of my kids. And I remember standing in the hallway and I cried so hard. And my kids were like, it's going to be okay, mom. And I'll probably never forget that moment. And I think that moment was a turning point for me, that I knew I still had my kids and my family, and I needed to focus on that. And after that Christmas and moving on after that, I really started to, obviously I was still angry with him, but I needed to start to get my life back together. So I just leaned on my sister a lot. I had a couple of really, really good best friends, and I leaned on them a lot. I went to see them a lot. I talked to them a lot, and I was able to get out a lot of my anger with them. Um, wasn't
So,
interested in going out, didn't socialize out. Took me about a year and a half, and my friends were finally like, "Come on, you got to go out to dinner. You got to do something." And then I kind of started going out and starting to, feel good about myself again. So
So
that's
tell
kind of
me,
how the beginning of that process went. And that took at least a year.
So tell me a little bit about that part of anger when you were going through the grief process, because something that I share with people a lot is that anger is the part of us that loves us the most. It's not some negative, terrible thing you shouldn't feel or be, like
Hmm.
society says. I think that's completely wrong. But I think that anger holds a valuable lesson for us, or a message, is what I like to say, that we need to hear when we're actually being angry about something or feeling angry. There's a message behind that. What are your thoughts when you were going through that anger? What did it teach you or show you? And what did you learn from it?
So going through it, I felt good because I just was so mad, and I just, not that, shouldn't say I felt good, but it made me feel good when I could be angry at him or yell at him or say something to him, that was just like, well, you did this or you did this. Everything was his fault. Nothing was mine. It was all his fault. So that's how I felt when I was going through it. What did I learn from it? I did learn that I didn't want to be angry because from the rest of my life, I've seen so many of my friends and people I know go through divorces. I can tell you my current husband and his ex-wife do not get along. And I've seen the effects with the kids, and I've seen the effects on him, and he's still angry. And I did not want to be angry for the rest of my life. It's just not worth it. For what? I need to move on at this point. So I really learned that this was something I didn't want, you know. I didn't I went through it. It made me feel good when I could be mad at him. But after a certain point, when I realized I needed to get my life back, I was like, what are you doing? Like, he's gone. Like, what's the sense of being angry anymore? And you kind of move into that next stage, and then you get to that acceptance stage, which is really hard because you have to start accepting that everything was probably not his fault. Some of it is my fault. No, I wasn't the one who stepped out. I wasn't the one who, ruined it all. But I was probably still a part of the reason. And that's okay because now I have my life, and this is the way, how do I want to live my life moving forward? So I realized things that I wanted to do and find myself again and be like, hey, where was that Lisa that was in there doing those things that you did before you focused on your kid's life? Not that that was a
Mm.
bad thing, but my life had changed. And now I needed to balance my new life.
Well, that's what I love that you talked about that point of moving on from anger, because I do think that blame is a big part, especially in divorce. A lot of people always are quick to point the finger at one party or
Mm-hmm.
the other, and that's totally normal, by the way. But what I do like to share with people about anger and acceptance and blame is that that anger is the part of you not feeling seen or heard or understood, and typically in divorces, what I've found very common is there's a part of it that's just not understood very well. We don't fully know why certain people make the decisions they do, why they step out
Mm-hmm.
very quickly, or why things unravel the way they do, because it blindsides us in a lot of circumstance. So there is a lot of blame that goes on in that moment. But like you said about acceptance, and that's where I talk to people. I'm an acceptance coach, and I always share with them
Mm-hmm.
acceptance doesn't mean we like it and we agree to it and we're just going to move on with life like nothing ever happened. It certainly doesn't mean that. But it means that we acknowledge what happened, just strictly for what it is, not what we think it is, but just
Mm-hmm.
exactly what the situation is. And that's when we get to that place. A lot of, like you said, that anger kind of calms down a little bit because you
Mm-hmm.
got all that emotion out. And then that acceptance phase is where we start to rebuild and regain our confidence. And I love that you said, by the way, you started reflecting on what did Lisa do prior to the marriage? What did Lisa do
Mm.
prior to make herself happy? I think that's a huge, huge part of the healing process.
Yes, yes. And getting back to that person, and just trying to be a little bit of that person again, and again, still had to, function on the things that I was now a mom of four kids by myself, raising four kids, you know. And again, after I started to realize, and I'm sure it was still during that anger stage, but like you said, when the anger was starting to calm down, I was like, wait a minute. He goes out all the time. He's going on vacations all the time. I'm not doing anything. You know what? I want to go do something. And who's going to watch the kids? Well, you know what? He can. You're the father. You come on. you do this. And for a while, he would actually come and stay at my house, well, what was our house for the weekend, and I would go and stay with my sister for the weekend. And her and I would go out, we would have a ball, we would do girl stuff, and he would be with the kids for the whole weekend. They didn't have to move anywhere. They were in their own home, and he would just come there and hang out with them for the weekend. And then he would leave, and I would come home about an hour after he left. This way, we didn't really see each other. So it kind of worked out that way too. So we were able to make those arrangements. But there were times he was taking the kids to where he was, and they weren't happy, because it's not the way it was supposed to be. So, he was kind of trying to help them deal also. So there were a lot of people in the process, through the whole grief process.
So tell me a little bit about from your children's perspective going through that divorce situation, because you had 4 children at that
Hmm.
time, you still do. And I know divorce can be very hard on children because they don't really understand the dynamics of a relationship in that capacity. And also when it goes that direction, now it's dividing time up between mom and dad and whatever
Hmm.
situation. You guys had a unique situation with this divorce though, where you still are able to co-parent in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
How did your children navigate through that part when you guys were going through divorce, and when they realized you guys were able to still, be parents, so to speak, after going through that, how did that affect them?
So I wish I could be honest with you and tell you exactly how they all were feeling. I don't know. And I think I found that out now. I thought I knew, but when I was in the process of writing this book, I found out that none of my daughters want to read it. My son read it, but my
Mm.
daughters don't want to read it because they feel they're going to get pushed back to a place they don't want to be. So I'm guessing it was not a great process for them. And I guess knowing what I know now, I wish I had been more aware of that. We did sit and we talked. We would cry together. When they found out the real reason he left, the person that he left for, our families were very close. So that made it worse. So when they found out who it was, I can remember them, the girls especially, were in the bedroom and they were crying and cursing and wanting to scratch her car, and all the normal reactions that somebody would have. Um, but that was still their father, and I think each one has a different relationship with him. Um, and as I watch now, I still see the relationships with him, based on I think the processes that they went through. So I can't totally say how I know it was difficult for them. I know them having to go to their dads, or I think it worked out a little more when he would come by us. I think that worked out for them. The fact they didn't have to leave their home kind of worked out for them a little bit. They were, he didn't move where he was so far away that they would have to be driven to school. Like their routines didn't change too much you know, um, they still had games, they still went to the same schools, they still had the same friends. So I think a lot of that didn't change. I think a lot of the embarrassment was probably there for all of them. When I gave them the copies of their books, I did write some stuff that I think I was feeling that they might have been feeling, because a lot of this really, I didn't realize how they felt until some of my book was coming out. So here we were, all these years later, and I was like, wow, like I didn't know that, you know. Um, but I can probably say more so when him and I started to be more friendly, and I was now dating my now husband. Sometimes we would be out at a local bar. He would come in with his girlfriend. We would hang out. The families sometimes went out to dinner together locally. My kids think we were absolutely nuts that we did those kinds of things. Like they're just like, "Oh, I can't even believe we're all sitting here having dinner together. Like this is weird, you know." So for things like that, I think sometimes they were like, "You guys are crazy. Like I just can't believe we my kids were always saying we should have a reality TV show because of the relationship that we all had together." So but now everybody's, like I said, three of them are married, one is not, but they all have kids, and um so we have grandkids, and we're all together, and we have a great time. We really do. When the families are together, there's not that sense of, oh, your father's sitting over there, or God, he's such a jerk, or whatever. Um, so I think
That
everybody's kind of moved on to we're just one big crazy family.
I did. I'm just still kind of speechless that you guys are able to do that because I've very rarely met. I could probably say on my hands I could probably count the number of people that have had situations like that, and it's not very
Yeah.
many. Um,
No, I feel like I feel like I want to say to people, why? Like, why are you staying so angry? It's your life now. You're gonna get one shot at this. Why are you so angry? Just let it go. It's get past. You've got to get into that next. And I think some people never get into that acceptance stage, which is what you're talking about. Because if they got into that acceptance stage and realized and accepted that some of this was their responsibility, they might have a clearer way of moving on. I'm not saying everybody has to be the best of friends and everybody does not have to have the relationship we have. We are an odd bunch. I understand that. But to stay that angry and everything, I've seen it with people, and you're a coach, you've seen it. Everything that other person does makes them so mad. It's like, what do you care anymore? Like, you're not, what do you care? You know?
Yeah, it's people that,
It's,
we all have triggers and
mm-hmm,
um we all have past trauma things we work through. And I think
mm-hmm,
that especially when you go through things like a divorce or a job loss or loss of a child, loss of a really close family member, those big triggers are always sitting there waiting. And there's always
mm-hmm,
going to be something in the external environment that triggers that. And
right.
until you actually learn, which is what I love you talked about a lot today. It sounds like you've taken a lot of ownership over your part in things, which I really, really respect and love. Because to get to acceptance, that's really what you have to do. And I watched a Tony Robbins documentary on Netflix. It's called "I'm Not Your Guru," and something that he talked about with this girl who had a really bad relationship with their father. He said, "If you're gonna blame people for all the shit they do, you better blame them for all the good they do too." And what I
Mm,
thought was really interesting is he said, I'm not asking you to stop blaming. I'm asking you to blame effectively. And I thought that was a big difference
that's
between how we're
huge.
taught.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so,
It's
bringing this
easy
back
to
to what,
blame. It's easy to blame. No one wants to be responsible for things that happen or for the tragedies in their lives. We don't want to take responsibility for it, you know. And again, in the beginning, no, I did nothing wrong, and that's how I felt. But at some point, like I said, there was just like this aha moment where it was like, you know what, Lisa, do you want to spend the rest of your life being angry? Like, for what? It to make myself sick. It's just not worth it. And there's so much more out there. I mean, I have a new husband. We're married 11 years. Our families are blended. I've got grandsons on his side. I love them to death. We just took them on vacation. Like the families go away together. We're all together. It's just nice. It's just really nice because when we do things on my husband's side, it's very tense because not everybody
mm,
gets along. So now his girls get tense because they're together and they know they don't like each other. Like it's crazy. And I just look at it and I'm like, and then I made my husband read my book and I said, "Did you learn anything?" He's like, "No, I still hate her." I was like, "Okay, never mind." I was like, "Oh well."
oh my God.
But whatever,
So,
sometimes it's not going to change, and that's fine too. But like you said, you have to just try to get through the stages. And if you're going to stay mad, you can stay mad. Um, funny, this story is one of the stories also in my book is about a year ago, my ex got married and he called me and he said, "We want to send you an invitation to the wedding." And I was like, "Oh, that's nice, but it's your time." I'm like, and I'm not sure how the kids would feel about that. He said, "Oh, I already asked them," and they were like, "Sure, Dad, what's the difference? You guys do everything else together." So we went to his wedding. My ex and I danced. The cameras came out and took a crap load of pictures. My kids were like, "Oh my God," they were sending texts, "Mom and Dad are dancing, Mom and Dad are dancing." Like, okay, like, What do you want me to do? You know, but it was a great day. I had a blast, and I was glad I got to be a part of it.
That's really see, that's again something very unique that I don't think would happen very often with certain people.
Yeah.
Um, Lisa, I wanted to ask you about the acceptance stage of where
Hmm.
you got in this grief process because it is, in my opinion, the hardest stage to get to.
I think it is
We've got
too.
a lot of, you got to battle a lot of inner demons. You got to battle a lot of triggers. You got to battle a lot of past trauma or
Hmm.
things that got said or the way things played out. There's so much that goes on behind getting to that phase of acceptance. What did that look like for you when you did find acceptance? And did that give you a sense of freedom from those things or separation from those feelings? What was that experience like for you?
It definitely was a separation. I know exactly what you're saying because a lot of the grief clients that I work with, it's the same thing. You know, you go through the anger and the bargaining, and you try to get to acceptance, and guess what? You fall off the ladder and you go back because trying to get to that last acceptance stage is so difficult. And I find people constantly falling off the steps of that ladder and just starting over again because then they think about something and they get angry again, and then you have to work to try to get to there. Again, I just feel like there, after a few years, it was just a part of me that I never thought I was going to get to a stage where I would go to his wedding, or I never thought I'd get to a stage where we actually would like hang out together, but I just wanted to get to a point where we weren't arguing or fighting in front of my children. My children could still see that there is happiness to be done, and it just, I felt like when I was sitting one day, I remember the day, and it was right after my son's confirmation, and my ex and his girlfriend were at our house because we had had the party there, and they were like some of the last to leave. And there was just a point, I mean, this person was a friend of mine at one point. So it just got to the point we were talking that day, and it was just us sitting out there, and my new husband was with us, and the four of us were just sitting and talking. And when they left, I was like, all right, that wasn't so bad. Like, we actually had a nice conversation, and it felt good. It just felt really, really comfortable. And I think from that point is when I kind of started, was like, all right, I know I can tolerate her. I can be in the room with her. I can, so my hatred towards her was starting to move away also. So I think, I had to accept that they were together. This was not going to change, and I now had a new boyfriend, so my life was moving on. So at that point, it was kind of like, okay, look, the four of us were here, we sat together, we had a great conversation, and it felt good. So why not try to continue on that path? And not, I was not going to say I wanted to be happy for him because I didn't want to be, and I wasn't. And that didn't change until he moved on to different people. But because I probably would have, I don't know, maybe if he had stayed with her, I'm not even sure if that phase would have changed. But they eventually ended up splitting, and he ended up with somebody else. And it just got easier and easier for me as he was moving through his stages, and I was watching him go through his stages. There was never, and I can tell you honestly, there was never an I'm sorry. There was never an I made the biggest mistake of my life. Like, that never came out of his mouth. I
Hmm.
never heard any of those words, and I still have not heard those words to this day. Um, but I know he made the biggest mistake of his life. But you know what? My life is better now, and I know that. And I have a great guy, and I have a great life. We
That's
get
really
one shot
beautiful to
at
have that
this.
perspective.
Yeah. I've just always had the feelings of you're getting one shot at life. This is it. You get one round, and when it's over, it's over. This is it. So why not try to be as happy as you can, or let others see you happy, you know?
I couldn't agree more with you on that front because I've gone through my own journey with that, losing my child and a few other things in my life, and I'm in that place where you're talking about today of we have one shot at life, and the only thing I care about in my own personal life right now is working to help others work through their grief and
Right.
trauma. I get a lot of passion out of that, but also at the same time, I just want to be happy. I don't have time for negativity and things like
Right.
that. If people are on that journey, that's their journey, and they can go do
Right.
whatever they feel like with it. But my journey, me personally, I want to go live a life of happiness because, like you said,
Hmm.
we have one shot at this. And I think it's because I've talked to so many people that have gotten cancer or lost somebody to cancer, or somebody that's lost somebody to a car accident, or
Hmm.
somebody that lost somebody to suicide. And I've talked to people in so many aspects of grief and loss. And I've come to that place to realize when we do sit in our anger too long, or we sit in that grief too long, it's taking away the time that we have. And
Hmm.
that's not to say you shouldn't feel those things, because I'm going to tell you right now, you will feel them and it's part
Right.
of the process. It just is what
Right.
it is.
And I
But I
was just
want you
going to
to,
say that too. You're still
yeah.
no one, and for people who are listening, no one is saying to anyone out there, step out of your grief, because you're never going to step out of your grief. And there are times when we're all together, even as our family, and sometimes I look at my ex and he'll do something that he did when we were married that made me so mad, and it still does. And I'm just like, God, like, and there's times in my head I'm like, God, I'm so glad I'm not with you anymore, and it happens, and it's okay because you're still gonna have that. And if it's the loss of a family member or a pet or anything, you're always gonna remember that person. We never want you to take that person out of your life. But yes, you have to accept that, yeah, that person's not here, but let's remember all those great times we had together. My kids will be looking at old pictures, and my sister just brought out a whole bunch of old pictures, and my kids were looking at them, and they looked and they're like, oh, this is pre-divorce. Now they call them pre-divorce or after divorce, like the pictures. It's like, yeah, because they'll look at my hairstyles or something like, oh, this is definitely pre-divorce. You were still with dad with this one. And they'll send pictures to him and like, Dad, we're looking at these pictures. And he's like, oh, I remember that. Again, they were still good times we had together. Can't take that away from my kids. We still had family times together. We still had vacations together. I can't pretend that didn't happen.
Yeah,
You know,
that's why I always
right?
tell
So,
people you're never gonna get over your grief. You're not, that just
mm-mm,
doesn't exist. But and I also tell people too, their grief doesn't have a time limit on it. And that's why I try to tell everybody, because I do get asked often, how long do people take to get over things? And I say,
right.
I've watched people do it in 3 months. I've seen people it take 10, 20 years to do it. I can't
Mm-hmm,
really tell you what's the right way or the right time.
right.
I can't speak to that, but I can just say that you'll know. And that's what I love about your story today, that you alluded to a lot when you got to that place of acceptance, is it
Mm-hmm,
happened when it needed to happen. It happened when
right.
it was ready for you. And you knew, by the way, when it was ready for you.
Mm-hmm,
And that's truthfully, that's to me what matters. And that to me is what's right, is when
right.
you figure it out for yourself and it's the right timing for you.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. And I can't agree more that it's a journey, it's a process, and it can take however long. And again, like I said, my anger journey was almost a good full 2 years that I was going through that anger and the bargaining and all the other stuff until I could move myself into that next, where I started to like myself again and make myself the person that I was, which allowed me to now go out, which allowed me to meet people, which allowed me to meet my new husband. And my life has moved on, and it's great, and my kids are happy for me. And like I said, my ex finally found somebody, and I went over to his house the morning of his wedding. We stopped over there on the way to the hotel, and I was like, hey, I said, how you feel? And he's like, I don't know, I'm kind of nervous. It was funny, it was like a stupid conversation, but it was like, I said, I'm so happy for you. I said, I really am glad that you found somebody, and hopefully now they're going to have a great life together. And, he got a second chance. I got my second chance. Everybody doesn't get that.
Yeah, that's what I
So,
think is important to take away is, some people don't get a second chance in life, and things play out the way they do. And so if you do get that second chance, take
mm-hmm,
advantage of it. That's where there's so much good that can happen out of our grief stories that I share. And that's why I have my podcast the way I do, is that I
mm-hmm,
want people to come on and say, I didn't just go through the grief and this horrible, nasty thing over here, but this is what happened walking through this journey and where I discovered my
right.
healing path. And now you're happily remarried to somebody that you
Mm-hmm,
really like, and you still have your family intact and everybody gets along for the
yeah.
most part. A lot
Yeah.
of people, by the way, have the opposite situation where it's, I
Mm-hmm.
still hate this person. I'm never going to want to be around them or see them. Kids are torn apart. It just, everything goes to the wayside. And to hear you be able to walk through that journey and still, and be in this place of today where you're at, I think is truly a huge, huge gift that came out of that
Mm-hmm.
grief journey.
Yeah, I agree with you, and that was one of my passions. I do work with many different grief clients, but I do like to work especially with people have who have gone through the divorce process, because I think a lot of people don't realize that it's a grief process. And they're just supposed to, they just think they're supposed to be mad for the rest of their lives. That's not grief, that they're just mad, and it's like, well, but it's not. And when you can get past that, and yeah, I have friends that they're never gonna get married again. They're so angry. It's just like they're just so angry. And it's just like you gotta start getting past that, and accept that this is the way it is now. So what do you do to make yourself do you not want to be happier? I'm sure you do. So now you need to step by step, and it's baby steps, to get yourself back to where you want to be. So, and
Well,
it's
that's
it's hard.
that's I think the hard part about that and why people get stuck in anger, and I was there for a long time going through narcissistic abuse in many ways. People don't realize why they hang on to their anger so much is we're trying to hang on to a past version, a past life of who we are. We're trying to cling to that thing and say, well,
Mhm.
we want this or we're used to this or it's comfortable. And I've always
Right.
shared with people when you live in the past, it will hurt the present and kill the future, is what it will do. And it will slowly do it over time. You won't see it hit in an
Hmm.
instant, but it will do it over time. And I've seen people miss a lot of opportunities and a lot of chances in life being stuck there. And that's why grief is so hard because we're stepping into who we're supposed to become or where we're supposed to be. And that's very unknown and very uncertain. It's very
Hmm.
scary to walk away from things. And I share it in the capacity that if you've been married to somebody for 15, 20 years, that's been a routine in your life. This body of
Right.
yours is comfortable here. It's going to be
Right.
uncomfortable over here. It's all
Right.
unknown.
Very
Um,
uncomfortable. And there's so many things and so many feelings that run through your head, especially when it's in a divorce situation. But even in the death of my mom just passed a few months ago, and she was 94. My mother had an absolutely great life. But it's funny, at my age I still feel like an orphan, because I don't have my mom or my dad anymore. And I have to get through that process myself, because I sit there, well, I have my sister, my brother's 3,000 miles away. So it's me and her now, and you just don't have that comfortable person that held the family together. They're gone now, and we all have to go through it, and
yeah.
we don't know how long it'll take. But regardless of what it is, like you said, a dissolved marriage, a dissolved relationship, a death, it's grief is grief, and we all have to go through the same stages.
Well, I wanted to ask you as we get towards wrapping up the end of the podcast here, I wanted to give you some space to talk about your book, Navigating Grief and Divorce.
Hmm.
What prompted you to write the book is my first question, and when did you decide to write it?
I had always, again, we'd always joked about having this reality TV show and how crazy our family is. And um, my family was always like, everything's just so crazy. I feel like, people should hear what we do, because maybe it would just help people. And I'd be like, no, no. And then when I went through the whole grief education course, and I learned so much about grief and divorce, and I thought, you know what? Maybe my story can help somebody. And I literally I was in the middle of the night and I started writing some stuff on my tablet. And then I thought about it and I was like, no, I don't know. I'm not a writer. So I was like, let me see how it works out. And you know what? As I just started doing it, it just worked. And like I said, towards the end of my book, one of the biggest things is, if there's questions in the book, there's journal pages in the book. So, and it talks about each grief process, and then it's my story through that grief process. So it really can help anybody that is in grief. And like I said, they may not end up at the end like I did, but maybe they'll get some inner peace or move into that acceptance stage where they can find some inner peace to be able to move on. So I just felt maybe my story, as crazy it is, might help some people, get through their own journey.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful thing to help people walk through that acceptance process. And it's I've always shared too about grief that there is no 12-step program for that. There
Mm,
is no do it my way or anybody else's way, but it's through the power of everybody's story that where we learn about these things. And
hmm.
I've learned a lot personally from everybody from divorce to death to job loss to I mean all over the gamut. I've learned through
Hmm.
those stories. I may not have experienced them, but it was through that storytelling that I was able to figure out my own grief components of how to move forward.
Right.
So I love that you did that, by the way.
Yeah.
um, and I love too that you wrote notes to your family when you gave that book out. I think that's a beautiful way to honor that piece that you wrote because it takes a lot to put a book
Yeah.
together in that
Yeah,
capacity.
yeah, and when I like I said, when I first asked them, my kids were like, "Oh no, mom, that's great." I guess they just thought I was never going to do anything with it. But then as it got closer and closer, I found out they were like, "Oh no, I'm not going to read it." And I'm like, "What?" I'm like, "What do you mean you're not going to read it?" Like it blew my mind. I took it so personally that they didn't want to hear it. And I kept saying to him, remember, this is not your story. I don't know what you felt like going through it. I can't put that in there. This is my story and what I felt, so you're going to hear what I went through. And my son did read it. And he said he learned a lot. So it was interesting that
Wow.
yeah, he said because there was
That's
a lot of
amazing.
stuff, I guess, in there that I never shared with them, so they didn't know, a lot of the inner stuff. So, yeah, he was like, he's like, wow, he's like, it's a lot I learned about it, and I was like, oh, okay, great, like, you know, but yeah, I'm glad I did it, and I like I said, doing this, I hope it will help people, and if anything, just help them find a little bit of peace inside to realize that you got one shot. Just go try to be a little bit happier and let that part go. I think it's great you being an acceptance coach because I think that's the hardest stage of grief to get to and to be in and for to try and keep people there. It's great.
Well, I try to tell people acceptance is not going to be one of these things where it's like climbing a mountain where you're going to get to the peak and say, okay, I got my acceptance. I'm good.
Yeah.
It's not that.
No, you have to stay
You're
there.
it takes work to stay there. And,
Hmm.
I will say it gets a little easier over time. And I really preface a little easier because it's a work in process journey. And you're
Right.
going to have days where it feels like you took two steps forward and five back. It's going to feel like that. There's going to be days that you can move forward really easily. And so it's about being compassionate with yourself and understanding with yourself that acceptance is going to be a journey. It's not a destination. It's not some peak to reach or some milestone to
Hmm.
say, yeah, I got to it. But when you do feel it and it comes over time, it gets a little easier and it makes it a lot better for you to navigate your journey going forward.
Right, right. And for people out
Mm.
there that might be going through this, again, I think you can stay in anger as long as you need to. I'm not saying like, you got to move on this month, this month, this month, but just think about your children if you have them in this process and what are your reactions, what effects they're having on your children, because you need to keep your children in mind. They're going through something also, and I think like for us being able to co-parent, even as angry as I was, we were able to co-parent until we did get to that better stage. But you still they need to know that you're still making decisions together, because it's going to get really confusing for them. And you don't want them being angry at one or the other either. That doesn't help the process.
Well, Lisa, I wanted to ask you
So,
since we were talking about your book, where can people find that book if they're interested to purchase it?
it is on Amazon, it's on Barnes and Noble, and it is available on my website. There's links there too. My Facebook page, there's links.
Okay, perfect.
Right.
And for everybody listening today, I will have Lisa's links to her social media, or website, and her book in the show notes. So when you guys get done listening to the episode, I definitely recommend connecting with her and checking out her book. She's got a phenomenal story. And as you guys have heard today, this is not the common course of things for a divorce. It's a one-off situation, but I can tell you, by the way, I've witnessed a lot of people going through divorce, and this is something that can happen. And it will not come overnight. It's not going to be easy, by the way,
Mm-mm.
but it is something you can work towards, and in whatever capacity that may show up in your own life. I just want to give you guys hope today by listening to Lisa's story that there is a brighter future out there. And when you are able to release a lot of anger and find that place of acceptance on your own time, because I'm not telling you when to do it, but when you
Right.
do, but when you do get there, great things can happen. And Lisa's a prime example of that. Lisa, I'd Really want to say thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast today.
Thank you. I had a great time.
And as we end the podcast, I usually ask my guests a couple questions, and one of them we answered is where to find you. But if you run into somebody going through grief or navigating grief that's having a hard time with it, what was one thing you would share with them to help them navigate that journey just a little easier?
I always tell people two things. One, it's okay not to be okay. So feel how you need to feel and for as long as you need to feel. And when you can move on, try to hold grief in one hand and joy in the other.
That is beautiful. I have not heard that yet. I appreciate you
Yes,
sharing that.
no problem. That's usually my two pieces I can give to them.
I think that's wonderful advice to give because definitely going through grief, there's going to be days you don't feel okay, and that's okay. You do not need
Right.
to fix yourself. You're not broken. There's not a problem with you. You're navigating grief in the way that you need to. And
Exactly.
I love that idea of holding grief in one hand, but giving yourself the opportunity in the other.
Yes, absolutely.
You can be two things at once.
Absolutely. Yes, we
So,
can.
well, Lisa, thanks so much for being on the show today. For listeners out there, like I said, Lisa's links will be in the show notes. So when you get done listening to this episode, take a look there and get connected with her. Her book, Navigating Grief and Divorce, can be found on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. And I will have links there. I definitely recommend checking it out because she has a beautiful, unique story that I know can help a lot of you guys if you are going through divorce or situations that this story resonates with. So I want to thank you guys for joining Lisa and I today on this episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with somebody you know who could benefit from Lisa's story. For more episodes that are designed to empower you and support you during your grief journey, visit empowergriefjourney.com and subscribe to this podcast. You can find us on Apple and Spotify. The Empower Grief Journey is all about honoring your journey, embracing your emotions, and finding strength in your own time. I want you to know you're never alone on this journey, and together we can navigate grief with courage and compassion. Until next time, be kind to yourself and take your grief journey one step at a time.